Hello everybody, welcome to Sudhakar Art and Photography, yet another video on painting tips and tricks. This video is dedicated to the art and science of glazing and oil painting. So this is the portrait that we will glaze today. This is one of the portraits. I have two portraits that I'm going to demonstrate on. This is the first one. This is a portrait of my mother that I did for her 90th birthday. We're not going to glaze the entire portrait, but just her fabric, her sari, which is a kind of a silk material. So I'm going to give an appropriate coat of a mix of two yellows on the fabric, and then we'll see how it looks. But before that, let's look into the history of glazing and what the glazing technique does to a painting. Glazing was a popular technique back in the 17th century, and Dutch painters like Johannes Vermeer used glazing very selectively to produce great results on his paintings. The old masters applied multiple layers of glazing actually over the opaque underlayer to create an illusion of depth, and you might have seen this in some of those masterpieces created by these great masters. So what exactly is glazing? In simplified terms, to keep it short, glazing involves applying a thin layer of transparent or semi-transparent layer of paint over another layer of opaque paint. So basically, you take a canvas, you create your painting, you wait for it to dry completely, and then you apply a thin layer of transparent or semi-transparent layer of paint. That's what this is. But why should you glaze a painting? When light falls on a painting, it actually passes through the layer of glaze, gets reflected back from the layer of opaque paint, and then passes out through the layer of glaze. So basically, light travels through the transparent or semi-transparent glaze, hits the opaque paint, then gets reflected out again through the transparent or semi-transparent layer of glaze. And when you see that light coming out through that transparent glaze, it changes the chroma, value, hue and texture, and achieves an extraordinary luminosity that cannot be created otherwise, which means that you have to do glazing to get those effects. There's no other way you can get those effects. Let me explain this a little more in detail. First of all, let's turn this painting around and take a vertical cross section to see those layers. So here's a kind of a diagrammatic illustration of how light falls on the canvas through the glaze and gets reflected back. Do pay close attention to this diagram. The thick line, the vertical line that you see is of course the canvas, and to the left of it you can see the three labels which says canvas, paint and glaze in the same order. So on the canvas you have the layer of opaque paint, that is the painting that you do, and then it's covered with a thin layer of glaze. Now towards the right side of the canvas you see a few arrows. There's one arrow on the top and there's one below which says light falling on canvas. So that's the external light falling on the canvas. It passes through the translucent glaze, hits the opaque paint and gets reflected back. So the four arrows in the middle that you see, colored a little differently and titled reflected light, is the light that comes out of the canvas. Now because there is this translucent layer of glaze, the light returning from the canvas is different. There's an additional color to it because it's bland, and it's because it's passing through this translucent layer. It gives an illusion of depth, increased texture, increased depth, chrome hue and all of that. So that's how a glaze can benefit a painting. Three very important points to remember when you attempt to glaze an oil painting. First of all, dry the painting for 6 months before you even think of glazing, because it is during these 6 months that the opaque paint that you apply on the canvas, it goes through a process of chemical reaction, chemical change, because it's exposed to the external air, and that's when it expands. Now if you apply the glaze before that layer is fully expanded, it's going to come up with a lot of cracks, and your glazing is going to be cracked, and it's going to ruin your painting. That's extremely important. Give it absolutely enough time to be fully dry, bone dry. Second thing is, choose your color carefully. You'll see that in the first portrait that I'm going to show you, the underlying fabric is very light lemon yellow. So therefore I have chosen a mix of cadmium yellow and lemon yellow mixed with the liquid, because it goes with the color combination, and it's going to look exactly like the original fabric. Now you can't add a green to it because it doesn't really blend, and it'll look quite different from the original fabric. So choose your color very carefully and appropriately. And thirdly, once you apply the glaze, give it sufficient time to dry. So leave the painting undisturbed in a cool, dry place, giving it enough time to completely dry. So we're all set to start the process here. Let me take you through the materials that I'm going to use. The canvas is right here. This is the painting portrait of my mother that I was talking about. Primarily, we're going to use liquid. I hope you can see this. This is generally the medium that we use for glazing. This is from Winsor & Newton. I'm going to dilute this with a bit of odorless turp. Generally, this is the one that I'm going to use, and this is generally to reduce the thickness of the liquid appropriately, to make it the right consistency while I apply this. This is the brush I'm going to use, generally the flat brush. Not a very expensive one, but I wanted this with some loose bristles, just to run through the medium over the fabric. And what kind of paints? I'm going to use lemon yellow. This is lemon yellow, and this is a transparent paint, as you can see here from the mark. And I'm also going to mix a little bit of cadmium yellow. This is also going to go along with lemon yellow to get the right tint, as it were, to get the best effect from glazing. So that's what we'll do now. So I'm going to go ahead and mix these things here. Be very careful when you are using these mediums. These are all toxic chemicals. You need to make sure that you don't inhale the fumes. You have to make sure that you wash your hands as soon as you finish. So there you have the liquid. Now I'm going to add a little bit of thinner to this. Now, because the fabric has got a mix of lemon yellow and white and spots of cadmium yellow here, I thought it's best to use a mix of both these colors to bring out the silky, lustrous look of the sari that my mother has been wearing. So let me take a little bit. This is the tricky bit, actually. You need to add colors appropriately. You can't add too much of it, and then you can't add too little of it.
when you add too little, of course you have the option of correcting it and adding a little more. But if you add too much of color, then the glazing layer becomes far too translucent. So you have to very carefully add the colors here. This is nothing but a very dilute mix of transparent colors with the medium. That's all it is. So I've added lemon yellow. Now let me add the cadmium yellow here. Not too much of it. It's predominantly going to be the lemon yellow, but just a wee bit of cadmium as well. And it's very important to try one corner of the garment to see how it looks, and if you need, then you can add more to it. So at this point, let me use the brush and let me mix this mixture thoroughly. We try this a little bit and see how it looks. Doesn't look too bad to me because I can see the dark layer beneath this translucent layer, and that's important because otherwise if it masks the lightened shades, then it'll spoil the effect of the painting. So I think this is dilute enough, and I'm getting a strong tint here. So I'm going to go ahead with this. Let me remove all of this and then continue this process of applying it. Now, ideally, I would have liked to go around these spots because I didn't want the yellow to be on top of that red spot. But anyway, at this point, I'll just go ahead with this. If you notice, I'm using the strokes that go along with the fabric. I'm not using horizontal strokes like this. I'm using the strokes that flow with the garment. That's important. It's subtle. The effect is subtle, but it's definitely important. In a situation like this, make sure you don't cross the edges. So make sure it's within the edge so it doesn't go into the background. I'm wiping the brush off a little bit with a tissue paper. And I'm going to use the dry brush to spread it out here so I can conceal the strokes a little more when I spread the paint with the dry brush. I'm wiping the brush off a little bit with a tissue paper. And I'm going to use the dry brush to spread it out here. So I like liquid as a medium because it's quite lustrous by itself, which is probably why liquid is the preferred medium. for glazing. So what I've essentially done here is I've wiped off the excess liquid with the dry brush. I can still see those dark shades beneath this layer of glazing, so it's not going to interfere with my painting. It's not going to interfere with the light and shades. Right, I'll stop it here at this point.
This is the second portrait I mentioned. This is the portrait of one of my best friends, his late mother. I made it as a gift for him.
Right, now here's the second painting I talked about. I now have a similar mixture of liquid thinner, odorless thinner, and a mix of vermilion with another red, Venetian red I think it is. So I've got two reds mixed with this, crimson and Venetian red, all mixed together. And let's see how this looks, because this garment has got a different tinge to it. So when I painted this, I felt it could do a little more with a conventional red. So which is why I'm trying to use the mix of vermilion to this liquid. And then we'll see how it looks. We'll always start off with the far corner and see how it looks, and then you can adjust the concentration of your mixture and then spread it across. So this is not too bad. Be careful about the borders. You don't want the red glaze to fall on the yellow borders, so you have to make sure that that's done properly. And then you can now spread this red across. So here's another thing as far as this painting is concerned. I'm trying to avoid the glaze over the ornaments that she's wearing here, so because I think a red glaze over the yellow ornament might not go too well. It could reduce the luster of that yellow, the gold chain that she's wearing there. So I'll avoid the ornaments at this point. I'll avoid the border of the sari, because that contains a lustrous yellow. I don't want that to be covered with the glaze. Like I did for the last painting, I'm following the flow, the strokes with the flow of the garment. The garment flows this way, so I'm keeping strokes the way it is. Continue with this. Just make sure you spread it evenly across. I'm doing the same thing here. I'm going to wipe off excess. And do exactly what I did for the previous portrait. Wipe off the excess again and spread it evenly. Now I'm going to wipe a little bit off here because it crossed the borders by mistake. So that does it. That takes off the spillover into the areas I don't want it to spill. Now continue this process. Dry the brush. Continue to spread it evenly. So there you go. We'll now see how both the paintings look before the glaze and after the glaze. There you go, that's complete. This one more thing I want to do to this painting. The glazing is now complete, but I want these highlights to come out a little more, so the effect of the silk sari is visible clearly, and it just kind of pops out because of the lights that's coming from two directions as far as this portrait is concerned. So what I've done is I'm mixing some vermilion with a little bit of titanium white. Titanium white is very opaque, and it should, as you can see the symbol here, it's an opaque paint, and it should when spread out on these areas, it should show like reflecting light. So let's go ahead with that. I'm using a thin dagger here just to test this glaze. One of the best tools you can use, particularly for oil paint, is your fingers. The way the paint spreads when you use your fingers is quite amazing actually. You can actually thin the surface, spread the surface, do what you want with your fingers actually. The tip here is a bit bright, so touch this area as well. Okay, I think I'm satisfied with that. I did this because I felt the transparent layer of glaze was kind of making these highlights a bit dull, so I thought I'll just touch those up. I think I'm good now. Let's see how it looks.